just a little bit. With just a touch of love. I'm dancing in time with my favorite. I say I make it weak at the knees, baby.
At 69, Steve Arrington has watched 5 of his former bandmates die. His bassist was beaten to death in 2011. His guitarist died 3 months later. 3 more followed by 2023.
We would had this local band together with some other people, but we were all in 6th period together, music class, with Danny Webster, who was the guitarist from Slave, and also Mark Hicks, the guitarist from Slave. So we all would be in 6th period jamming together.
In 1990, he walked away from his music career to become a minister. He thought he was following God's plan. He was wrong.
I then made a career change, and while away from the music scene, many sampled my music.
The decision that was supposed to save his soul destroyed everyone he cared about. So let's get into it. Stephen Ralph Arrington was born on March 5th, 1956, in Dayton, Ohio, a city that would become legendary for producing some of the greatest funk artists of all time. Growing up in a musical family with a preacher uncle who called him Music instead of music, Steve was exposed to both spiritual and secular music from an early age. His uncle saw something special in young Steve, recognizing a spiritual quality that would later become central to his identity as both an artist and a person. As a child, Steve was already demonstrating his musical talent by playing drums on pots and pans before he ever got his first drum set. He played drums in his brother's band, the Soul Agents, and spent his pre-teen years performing with groups like the Soul Illusions and Eluders. These early bands opened for major acts like Spider Turner, Jerry Butler, and Irma Franklin at the prestigious Lakeview Palladium, giving young Steve exposure to professional-level performances and the music industry.
We would had this local band together with some other people, but we were all in 6th period together, music class, with Danny Webster, who was the guitarist from Slave, and also Mark Hicks, the guitarist from Slave. So we all would be in 6th period jamming.
By his senior year in high school, Steve was playing with a band called the Young Mystics, which included several musicians who would later become original members of Slave. In 1975, Steve and his friend Victor Godsey began touring the country with a lounge band called the Murphys, gaining valuable experience performing across different venues and learning the business side of music. This experience taught him discipline and professionalism that would serve him well throughout his career. In 1976, Steve made a bold decision to relocate from Ohio to San Francisco, California, where he immersed himself in Latin percussion and drumming. He studied with renowned musicians like Coke Escovedo and played drums with Pete Escovedo and Sheila E., who was already establishing herself as a major talent. This period was transformative for Steve, as he learned to replace fusion legend Billy Cobham in the drum seat, which he described as trying to fill the shoes of the greatest drummer in the world. The experience of playing with the Escovedo family and touring with the Salsa West Coast Latin All-Stars, which featured Carlos Santana on guitar, expanded Steve's musical vocabulary and technical skills. He was learning from some of the best musicians in the world and developing a unique style that combined funk, Latin rhythms, and jazz influences. This diverse musical education would later become one of his greatest strengths as a performer. While Steve was developing his skills on the West Coast, several of his former bandmates from Dayton had formed a new group called Slave.
Slave was sort of like the youngest side of the Dayton movement.
By 1977, Slave had scored a #1 hit with Slide, and their success was growing rapidly. After their second album, the band was looking for a change in drummers, and Steve's former bandmates knew he had developed into an exceptional musician during his time in California. When Slave reached out to Steve, they were impressed by what they called his groove. He had developed a distinctive style and approach to drumming that perfectly complemented their funk sound. In 1978, Steve joined Slave for their third album, The Concept, initially as a percussionist and backing vocalist. He was content to sit behind the drum kit and contribute to the band's rhythm section, but his voice was too powerful and distinctive to remain hidden for long. When Steve Arrington joined Slave in 1978, he had no intention of becoming the lead vocalist. He was hired as a drummer and percussionist, and he was perfectly happy to contribute to the band's rhythm section while occasionally providing backing vocals. However, fate would intervene in a way that would change not only his career, but the entire direction of Slave's sound and commercial success. The turning point came during the recording of their next album, Just a Touch of Love. The singer who was scheduled to record lead vocals for the title track hadn't shown up to the studio for weeks, creating a significant problem for the production schedule. Producer Jimmy Douglas decided to experiment by having different band members try their hand at lead vocals, hoping someone would come up with something that worked for the song. When it was Steve's turn at the microphone, he improvised a melody line that was unlike anything the band had heard before. His vocal style was unconventional, featuring unexpected note choices and a distinctive emotional quality that was both urgent and passionate. Some people in the studio thought it sounded strange at first, but everyone agreed that it worked perfectly for the song. This spontaneous moment defined Steve's vocal style and established his new role as Slave's frontman. The success of Just a Touch of Love proved that Steve's unique vocal approach was commercially viable.
A little bit, just a little bit.
The song reached number 5 on the R&B charts and became a funk classic that would be remembered for decades. His voice had an unpolished quality that was beautiful in its raw emotional power, and it added a completely new dimension to Slave's sound. The band members respected his creative contributions and welcomed his melodic sense and lyrical approach to their music. Steve's vocal style continued to develop as he performed with the band on the road. By the time Slave recorded their next major hit, Watching You, he had become even more adventurous with his vocal choices and stage presence. The song showcased his full range as a performer and became another major hit that would later be sampled by numerous hip-hop artists, including Snoop Dogg's classic Gin and Juice. Other major hits followed, including Wait for Me and Snapshot, all of which featured Steve's distinctive vocal style and helped establish Slave as one of the premier funk bands of the era. His voice could handle both powerful, driving anthems and more subtle, groove-oriented tracks with equal skill. The combination of his vocal talent and the band's tight rhythm section created a sound that was both commercially successful and artistically innovative. However, even during this period of creative and commercial success, Steve was beginning to experience internal conflicts that would later change the direction of his life. He later recalled thinking while on tour buses, "There has to be more to it than this." Despite loving music and being passionate about his art, he felt that something was missing from his life and career. The spirituality that had been a backdrop in his life since childhood was starting to move to the forefront of his consciousness. These feelings were still just fleeting thoughts during Slave's peak years, but they represented the beginning of a spiritual journey that would eventually lead him to make one of the most dramatic career changes in music history. By 1980, Slave had reached the peak of their commercial and artistic success with the album Stone Jam. But behind the scenes, serious problems were developing that would ultimately destroy the band. Despite their chart success and sold-out concerts, the business side of their operation was plagued by the same issues that had affected countless other talented black artists throughout music history: exploitative contracts, poor management decisions, and financial arrangements that benefited everyone except the musicians creating the music. Steve Arrington later described the situation as involving unresolved business, management, and personal issues that made it impossible for him to continue with the group.
One of the issues that was going on that Steve saw and was uncomfortable with, and it's been a part of Black entertainment since the beginning, where there was just business issues.
The conflict was particularly painful for Steve because he had developed close friendships with his bandmates and genuinely enjoyed the creative process of making music with them. He had contributed significantly to Slave's most successful period, and his distinctive vocal style had become integral to their sound and commercial appeal. However, the business problems had created an environment where it was no longer possible for him to function effectively as an artist or maintain his integrity as a person. In 1982, after the Showtime album, Steve made the difficult decision to leave Slave and form his own band, Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame.
I decided to go ahead and leave after the Showtime album to do Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame.
This was not just a career move, but also a statement of artistic independence. Steve had musical ideas of his own that he wanted to explore, and he wasn't interested in simply trying to recreate the Slave sound with a different group of musicians. He wanted to push funk in new directions and demonstrate the full range of his creative abilities. The formation of Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame allowed him to take complete creative control over his music and explore different aspects of his artistry. His debut album with the new band reached number 12 on the Top Soul Albums charts in 1983 and was praised by critics for its originality and fresh approach to funk music. However, his record label was not always supportive of his creative vision, nixing songs like the jazzy Tribute to Train and the art rock-inspired The Message because they didn't fit conventional commercial expectations.
There was people coming and going. The lineup always changed.
Steve found this artistic interference frustrating because he was trying to show the diversity of his musical abilities and explore different creative directions. The label's reluctance to support his more experimental work was part of a larger pattern in the music industry, where artists were expected to repeat successful formulas rather than grow and evolve creatively. Meanwhile, Slave continued without him, but the soul of the band had been fundamentally changed by his departure. Different lineups and new singers attempted to recapture the magic that had made their earlier work so special, but the fire that had once made Slave essential listening was diminishing. The band members struggled with personal issues, financial strain, and the painful realization that the music industry rarely protects its pioneers or rewards artistic innovation in the way that fans and artists hope it will. In 1984, during a break in recording what would become the Positive Power album, Steve Arrington experienced a life-changing moment that would redirect his entire career and personal philosophy. He was in New York City when he encountered a man wearing a sign that said, "Jesus was coming back." Having grown up in a Christian family but having also studied other religions, Steve was fascinated by what this man had to say and engaged him in conversation about faith and spirituality. This encounter sparked a religious conversion that would fundamentally change how Steve approached both his music and his life. The spirituality that had always been present in his background suddenly moved to the forefront of his consciousness, and he began to see his musical talents as gifts that should be used for a higher purpose. Rather than fighting against this spiritual calling, Steve embraced it with an open heart and mind, allowing it to naturally influence his artistic expression. Steve's newfound faith began to manifest in his music almost immediately. He later released solo albums like Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame and Dancin' in the Key of Life, which carried the funk DNA of Slave, but were now infused with spiritual messages.
I'm dancing in time with my favorite.
He was singing about God, truth, and inner peace while maintaining the tight grooves and musical sophistication that had made him famous. This combination of spiritual content and funky music created a unique sound that was unlike anything else in the industry. However, the music industry was not ready for Steve's artistic evolution. Christian radio stations thought his music was too funky and secular for their programming, while mainstream radio considered it too churchy and religious for their audiences. Once again, Steve found himself caught between two worlds, being too real and authentic for both commercial formats. This rejection was particularly painful because he was creating some of his most honest and personal work. The commercial struggles continued despite the artistic merit of his music. His 1985 album, Dancin' in the Key of Life, included the hit Feel So Real, which reached number 5 in the UK singles chart and brought him international recognition. The album showcased a fresh joy of spiritual conversion that connected with people around the world, but the American music industry remained resistant to his spiritual message. By 1986, Steve began using his concerts as forums for his religious beliefs, speaking openly about faith and spirituality between songs. This decision further alienated some industry professionals who were only interested in commercial success, but Steve felt compelled to share the message that had transformed his own life. He saw his platform as an opportunity to help others find the spiritual fulfillment that had given his life new meaning and purpose. In 1990, Steve made the ultimate sacrifice for his faith. He left the music industry entirely to become a licensed minister. This decision meant walking away from potential millions of dollars in revenue and abandoning the career that had made him famous. For most people in the entertainment industry, this choice seemed incomprehensible, but for Steve, it was the natural progression of his spiritual journey. Steve later explained that leaving music wasn't a struggle or sacrifice in the way that people imagined. He saw it as walking deeper into the musical and spiritual journey that he had always been on from the beginning. While Steve Arrington was pursuing his ministry and staying away from the music industry, tragedy began to strike the people he had once considered family. The members of Slave, the band that had made him famous and given him his start as a vocalist, began dying under circumstances that were both shocking and heartbreaking. These deaths would force Steve to confront the harsh realities of what his former bandmates had endured while he was away from the music business. In March 2011, Mark Leslie Adams Sr., Slave's legendary bass player, was found dead in Columbus, Ohio, at the age of 51.
Like that. It was like we started, we were 16, and we didn't really know just the basic concept of just business, how to present yourself and how to talk to people.
The circumstances surrounding his death were immediately suspicious, and his longtime girlfriend, Sheena D'Amico, began fighting for answers that the police seemed reluctant to provide. According to Sheena, Mark had been involved in 3 separate altercations on the day of his death, and she believed he had been murdered in a related incident. Despite her efforts to get justice for Mark, the case remains unsolved. Mark's death was particularly tragic because he had struggled with depression and addiction issues throughout his life and was scheduled to enter rehab in March 2011, just before he was killed. However, his autopsy showed no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of his death, suggesting that he was trying to get his life together. Sheena revealed that Mark had written songs for major artists including Criss Cross, Al B. Sure, and Jodeci, but was owed significant royalties that he never received. Just 3 months later, in June 2011, guitarist Mark "Drac" Hicks died at the age of 52 in Dayton, Ohio.
That you were the class clown. You were the group clown.
We call him the stage clown. This boy puts on a good show. He's tremendous.
What?
It's all good. It's all good.
Hicks had been severely overweight and was struggling with health problems related to his condition. Witnesses reported that he was sweating profusely on stage during his final performances and seemed to be laboring while playing. He died of either a heart attack or stroke, but the loss of another original Slave member within such a short time frame devastated the remaining band members and fans. The tragic pattern continued with more deaths in subsequent years. Saxophone player Orion Will Hoyt died in March 2020 at age 63. Singer and guitarist Danny Webster died in September 2020 at age 61. Most recently, drummer Roger Parker died in March 2023 at age 67. These deaths represented the systematic loss of the musical family that Steve had once been part of and highlighted the toll that the music industry had taken on these talented artists. What made these losses even more painful for Steve was learning about the financial struggles and personal problems that his former bandmates had experienced. Many of them had never received proper compensation for their contributions to Slave's success, and they had spent decades dealing with the aftermath of exploitative contracts and poor business management. The music industry that had made millions of dollars from their creativity had largely abandoned them when they needed support the most. At 69, Steve Arrington now faces the reality that most of his former bandmates are gone, and their deaths serve as a reminder of the price that many artists pay for their dedication to their craft. While his decision to leave music for ministry may have saved him from some of the personal and financial problems that destroyed his friends, it also meant that he was not there to support them during their darkest moments. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.